Well, I don't know if you ever pay attention to the bumper stickers around you when you're driving, right? But there's some good ones out there. I mean, if you get close enough, you'll see them where one might say, I hope you follow Jesus as closely as you're following me. And you're like, yeah, guilty. Or you have the sticker that's turned upside down that Jeeps have, and it says, if you can read this, flip me over. Right? I saw a new one that I've never seen before that says, make Orwell fiction again. Some of you will get that, all right? And so there's some good ones out there. Then you have your standard, just your honor student stickers, your stick figure families, and really the amount of stuff that you can display on the back of your car is kind of endless, right? But a pretty common popular sticker I see is the one that says coexist. Right? And so the coexist sticker, you have the different world religions symbols that make up the letters, and the heart behind this is one of tolerance. It's saying, like, why can't we all just get along? And I'll just be upfront and say, I love this. Like, I love the idea of us being able to coexist within other world religions. But the problem comes when we redefine tolerance, okay? So in the past, what it meant to be tolerant meant the accepting of the existence of different views. Right? So in the past, tolerance meant the acceptance of the existence of different views. But over the last few years, we've shifted that definition to now just being simply the acceptance of different views. That might seem like a small and subtle shift, but the truth is it's very big because the first definition makes space for people to disagree. It makes space for us to say things like, or to have respectful and thoughtful dialogue and to try to convince someone that you're right and they're wrong and to change their opinion. And that was just good. You can have respectful, thoughtful dialogue and coexist. But now the new definition doesn't make space for that. To disagree with someone, to say that you don't agree with them, that you think they're wrong, is to make you now hateful or intolerant. And why that's a big deal, okay, is because if that's who we are as a culture of the new tolerance, what we typically do is, if that's who we are, we project that on to who we think God is. So if we're tolerant of other people's positions, we believe that therefore God must also be tolerant of other people's positions. And so the question I have today is God tolerant? Is God tolerant of those who worship false gods? Is God tolerant of people celebrating things that he has clearly defined as sin? And we're going to see the answer to this question in Genesis chapter 19. All right, so Genesis chapter 19, if you're looking at the subheading of your Bible, it might say something along the lines of God rescuing Lot. It might say Sodom and Gomorrah. Who knows what it says, but I'll just be upfront with you and say, I was not planning to preach Sodom and Gomorrah when I planned out the summer series, right? So we're doing a survey of Genesis, kind of hitting high points on Sundays, and I had the liberty to pick and choose which stories I would unpack. As I planned out the series, Sodom and Gomorrah was not on the list. Like, I was not going to do this, but 2 weeks ago, I was praying and I was in Genesis, and God would not let me move past Genesis 19 until I agreed to preach it. And so you're like, this doesn't seem like a good growth strategy, Jeff. But let me tell you this. Here's the good news. God's word is not old and irrelevant. It is eternal and timeless. And because God's word is timeless, it's always timely. It's always relevant. And so we want to look to Genesis 19 and understand it in light of our own cultural moment, because there are so many parallels that we need to wrestle with, okay? So this is going to be an incredibly great sermon, maybe hard to hear, but great for our hearts, especially with where we are as a culture. So let's pick up in chapter 19, starting in verse 1. It says, the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed himself with his face to the earth and said, my lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way. They said, no, we will spend the night in the town square. But he pressed them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house, and he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. Okay, so as we read these first few verses, let me give you a little bit of background, some background on Lot and some background on the place that he's in, Sodom. So when it comes to Lot, Lot was Abraham's nephew. He was fatherless. His dad had passed away, which now makes Abraham kind of like a father figure. He was a full-grown adult. He's not a boy. He's an adult man, and he's independently wealthy. And so when you think about those things, that shows us that when Lot goes with Abraham on this mission, it's not because he has to, it's because he wants to. He wants to support the mission that Abraham is on. But if you read the story, God didn't tell him to bring his kindred with him. That was actually something he was supposed to leave behind. So the fact that that Lot is with Abraham is cluing us in that because of his presence, because of this compromise, there's going to be some conflict we'll see. So two ways we see compromise, two ways we see complications and conflict with Lot's presence come with one, when Abraham and Lot have to separate from each other. All right, so what's happening is they're moving along, their two entourages are too big to coexist. Like they're too big. It's like we can't get along together. Your herdsmen are at my herdsmen are making your herds bad. And so we just got to go our separate ways. So Abraham says, if you want to go this way and you can have it all. If you want to go that way and you can have it all. You get first pick and I'll take the leftovers. And so Lot's looking around to which side he'll take. He looks towards Sodom and it's desirable. Right? It's really a parallel to Adam and Eve when they looked at the fruit, and the fruit was desirable, okay? So he looks towards Sodom, and he desires it both physically because it's good-looking land, but also culturally because it appeals to the way that he wants to live his life. And so he moves all the way to the edge of Sodom. He's like, where's the edge at? And how do I get as close as possible without crossing into it? Right? So he's trying to get to the edge. He gets as close as he possibly can to Sodom. Now, what do we know about Sodom? All right, well, we know Sodom, or so that's the first conflict, the separation, where it shows us Lot getting as close as possible to Sodom. The second complication we see happens when a conquering king or a neighboring king comes and conquers Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding areas. And as they're coming down and conquering this area, all the people run. They're running for the hills. It says some are falling in pits, but Lot gets caught because he's not the fastest runner, apparently. So he gets caught. Abraham finds out that his nephew is caught and imprisoned, and he leads over 300 men on a military special ops mission to go and rescue his son. But that's a risky thing to do. And so what we're seeing here is Lot's presence is causing different conflicts in the story. All right, so that's kind of our background on Lot. The background on Sodom is this. Sodom is wicked and sinful. Okay, we see this starting in Genesis chapter 13, verse 13. We see it re-upped in chapter 18. But Sodom is a wicked and sinful place. If you want to know what Sodom was like, it's like Vegas had a baby with the red light district of Amsterdam, and that baby grew up on steroids. All right, like this is a really bad place to be. Okay, so Sodom is a wicked place. Well, in chapter 19, verse 1, we see two angels showing up to Sodom. So two angels are showing up to the city. If you go back to chapter 18, you're just reading the Bible straight through, there's actually three men, okay? They're angels who appear to be men. Two of them are angels. We believe the third actually to be a pre-incarnate Jesus, that Jesus is showing up in this moment. So Abraham brings these people in. He shows them great hospitality. And now in chapter 19, Jesus is out of the picture. The two angels are there. And Lot brings them in and says like, hey, let me show you some hospitality in the same way that Abraham did. But what's interesting, right, is when Abraham is showing them hospitality, the angels have a good time, but as they're leaving, they go, should we tell Abraham what we're about to do? And I think like Abraham's listening in. He's like, do what? He's like, should we tell him what we're about to do? And so they tell him, look, we're here to destroy Sodom. We're here to rain down fire and sulfur on this place. We're going to completely destroy it. And when Abraham hears that, he starts to plead with God. He's like, please, save the city. What if there are 50 righteous people present? If there are 50 righteous people, would you spare the city for the sake of the righteous? And God goes, yes. And then I think Abraham starts going through the Rolodex, the yellow pages, and he's like, I don't know if there's 50 people here. What about 45? And God's like, sure, 45. 20? Okay, I'm still in at 20. What about 10? What if there's just 10 righteous people? Would you spare the city for the sake of the righteous? And God says, yeah, If there are 10 people there, I'll spare the whole city. And from here, it says that basically Jesus goes down to do a full investigation. He's like, I'm going to go down, I'm going to investigate all the facts for myself to find if there are 10 righteous people or not. Okay, and so what we're seeing now in chapter 18, leading to verse 19, is that Sodom is headed for destruction. All right, so now that we have a little bit of background here with Lot and Sodom, in verse 1, we see Sodom sitting at the gate. That's an important note, because to sit at a city gate in this time in history was to have a position of honor, to have a position of leadership. And so what we see by this point is that now in chapter 19, Lot's not just near Sodom, he's not just at the edge, he is fully in Sodom. He's a homeowner. His daughters are engaged to Sodomites. He's in a position of leadership and influence. I mean, he's fully in Sodom. And you could make an argument that not only is Lot in Sodom, but Sodom is also in Lot. Okay? And so here's Lot sitting at the gate. Let's keep going in verse 4 and 5. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man surrounded the house, and they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." Right? And so seeing like all the boys, all the men, all the people, what that is showing us is that not only are there not 10 righteous people, there's not even a single righteous person. There's no one righteous in this town. So that lets us know, like, this place is 100% going to get destroyed. Okay? So the men of the city are like, hey, bring these dudes out because we want to, quote, know them. Now, there are two ways to know someone. You can know someone relationally, like, hey, where are you from? What do you like to do? Do you want to go golf? Like, there's golfing buddy knowledge. And then there is physical knowledge. Let's just call a spade a spade. The way that these guys want to know the two men isn't relationally. They want to force themselves into the house to do things physically that shouldn't be done. All right, so this is a bad situation here. Look at verses 6 and 8. Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." All right, look, verses 6 and 8 is tragic and heartbreaking. Right, as you read these verses, it's tragedy. Because what we see is that Lot does not condone their demands. He's not okay with their demands, but he does nothing to resist their desires. In fact, he actually offers a compromise by saying, like, what about my daughters? Would they do? And I think about that. I'm like, man, this is an important lesson for us, because Lot is a case study in compromise. That one compromise leads to another compromise, leads to another compromise, leads to another. And I would say that we all have these things in our lives that we say, I would never do that. Like, I would never, when it comes to your studies, I would never cheat. When it comes to your marriage, I would never do that. When it comes to your career, I'd never do this. When it comes to your parenting, we all have these things. But if you could look at someone's life in a 10-year window, and you have the front end where they're like, I would never, and then you follow the pattern of their life, if they are living in moral compromise, the chances of them not only getting to the edge, but crossing that line over the course of 10 years is really high. Right? If you are living in moral compromise, you're going to continue to compromise. Okay? If you're living in moral compromise, you're going to continue to compromise. Look at verses 9 and 11. But they said, stand back. And they said, this fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. Then they pressed hard against the man Lot, and drew near to break the door down. But the men reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house, and with them shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out, groping for the door. right? And so when they basically say like, who are you to judge us? How's this outsider now the judge of what the moral standard is? And the heart behind that is they're saying our morality doesn't come from the outside in. It's something that we decide as a society. They're saying we are the standard for morality. Morality comes from us. And I would say that this is rampant in our own culture. We don't like the idea of morality transcending us, being beyond time, beyond place, coming from a moral standard giver. We hate that. We want to be the ones who create morality. That what's right for me is right for me, what's right for you is right for you, and that we can all kind of live within this relativistic society. That's what we want. And so the way that this, who are you to judge me, that they're saying to Sodom, the way that's framed in our culture is, why can't you just let love be love? The way that that's framed in our culture are things like I don't know if we can really trust the Bible. It's old. It's been translated so much. And so I don't really think the Bible's relevant to our life, so we shouldn't have to follow it as our guide, right? Like we're still giving the same type of arguments. They're just repackaged in different ways, right? And so here are these men wanting to be their own moral standard, trying to do something that's completely wicked, and the angels strike them with blindness. Okay, now what's interesting about this is blindness is physical. They can no longer see, right? Blindness, but it is actually a picture of their spiritual reality, that spiritually they are blind. And now they're experiencing physically what was already true of them spiritually. Let's keep going, verses 12 through 14. Then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here? These are the angels speaking to him. Sons-in-laws, daughters, or anyone you have in the city, bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting or joking around. Like, I don't know if you've ever lived in a place with tornadoes, but if you know if you live in a place where tornadoes can happen, there is a huge difference between a tornado warning and a tornado watch. A tornado watch is conditions are favorable and a tornado could happen. A tornado warning is this thing has formed, it's touched down, and everything in its path is going to be destroyed. Take shelter. Right? What the angels are giving Sodom is not a destruction watch. They're giving him a destruction warning. Right? God is making a way for them to be saved before it happens by giving them this warning to get out. Look at verses 15 and 17. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, up, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city. But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his two daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought them out, one said, escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. If you back up to see what goes on in verse 15, and you're reading the story, they are giving him this destruction warning at night. And now in verse 15, he's waking up. What this means is after the angels said, we're going to destroy this place, get out of Dodge, he's like, I'm going to get a good night's sleep. Like, that's pretty ridiculous, right? It's like, I'm going to just lay my head on my pillow and I'm going to sleep like a baby tonight. And the angels are like, get up! The next morning, they're waking him up, like, get up, like, what are you doing? And they grab him by the hand and physically cause them to move. And this just reminds me of, there are two types of people that leave get-togethers. If you ever go to a party or a shindig, when it's time to go, there are two ways people do this. There are some who say goodbye, and they walk out. There are others who say their goodbyes, and then they linger for 5 to 7 other conversations. And typically these two people ride together, right? And so if you're the person who leaves, you're fully committed. You're outside and you're like, I can't go back in there. I already said goodbye. So you just wait in the cold until your friend comes out, right? Or the other person, you're just oblivious, right? Lot is the lingerer. Like he's just hanging around, seemingly completely oblivious to the urgency of the situation. And so the question I have is like, why the lack of urgency? Why is there such a lack of urgency in Lot's life? And I would say this. He's become so comfortable with the culture of sin that he now struggles to leave the familiar to faithfully follow what God has clearly said. Like he's just so comfortable with his culture of sin. It's so familiar to him that he's struggling to leave the familiar to faithfully follow what God has clearly said. Let's jump down to verse 24. Verse 24 or 23. It says, "The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar." That's the town that he flees to. "Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven, and he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt." All right, some people read this and they think that it displays a God who is irrational, hot-tempered, just kind of like a rage monster who's just ready to pounce on creation. But the truth is this action comes after a full investigation. Go read chapter 18, verse 21. God has done a full investigation of all the facts. And if you read scripture, what we know of God is God's not irrational, quick-tempered. He's actually merciful. He's patient. He's slow to anger. He's steadfast in his love. He's gracious. He continues to forgive time and time again. And so God eventually, though, gets to a point when he says, no more. And so at this point, the investigation shows they are completely guilty. They are fully deserving of all of God's wrath. And God has gotten to the point of saying, no more. No more. All right, as we read this, I've heard some people ask, like, is this a real story? Like, did this really happen? I mean, or is this just a fable? Like a story that you tell your kids to try to scare them into behavior modification, right? And so what's crazy about this is if you look this up, you can Google it, you can find it in textbooks, but the Dead Sea in Israel, to the southeast of the Dead Sea, long where we've believed the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah to be, they've done an archaeological dig. And in this archaeological dig, they have found two cities that have been completely incinerated, right? Not like a natural disaster or an invading army. They would say that this is beyond human technology in the way that this place was destroyed. To scientists' best guess, they would say that a giant space rock entered the atmosphere, becoming a ball of fire, hitting the ground, burning the place up with temperatures above 2,000 degrees Celsius because everything is completely destroyed. And so they're like, something happened here. Then you start doing the dating on it. And what they've discovered is the dating of this archaeological dig actually aligns with the dating of the events recorded in Genesis. And so we were like, seems pretty good. People are like, where's the sign? Does it say Sodom? No, it was incinerated, right? Completely destroyed. Like there's no sign there. But like what the Bible records, archaeological evidence typically supports, right? And so this is a real story. This really did happen, whether you try to explain it through science or just through the supernatural with God. But this is a real story. But let's come back to the story then. What happens to Lot's wife? Lot's wife looks back after she was told not to look back, and she becomes a pillar of salt. This is a lot like the blindness. It's a physical expression of a spiritual reality. Long before she looked back, she was already spiritually dead. Long before she looked back, she was already spiritually hardened. Long before she looked back, she was already spiritually immovable, right? And so now we're seeing a physical expression of a spiritual reality. And to that, I would say this. We talked about this last week, but don't delay obedience. When God is clearly speaking to you, the longer you wait to act in obedience, the less likely you are to ever move. And so as we're looking at Lot, another question I have is like, why did he linger? Why did he linger? And it makes me think of one of my best friends in 5th grade was Matt Lusk. And I'll never forget, like Matt Lusk was not a Christian and I wanted him to be. And so one day I invited him to spend the night. It was a summer night. I was like, come spend the night at my house. And so he comes over, we play Mario Kart until it's dark and time to go to bed. And at this point, like no one's calling his mom. There's no cell phones to text or anything. He's locked in. I'm like, this is my chance So I open up my NIV study Bible that I had received, and I'm like, can I read for you out of Revelation? And I try to scare him into heaven. I'm like, we're going to do this tonight. And I thought it was so convincing. Like, how do you hear this and not go like, give me Jesus? And I, without even blinking an eye, with a straight face, I'll never forget this. He looks at me and goes, yeah, I think I'll do the Jesus thing after I turn 16. It's like, I got a lot of life to live between 11 and 16 that I don't want to mess up. And I think about that, and it sounds ridiculous, like for an 11-year-old to be like, I've got a lot of things I want to experience. But the truth is, like, that spirit never leaves. Right? There are so many things where God is calling you to act in obedience, and you're saying things like, man, I'd like to dabble a little bit longer. I'd like to experience this before taking that step. I mean, after college, I will ... After I get married, then we'll do this. Or once we have kids. Or after my kids are out of the house. Like, that spirit never changes because we have this desire to dabble in things that we shouldn't dabble in. But when God clearly speaks to us and calls us to obedience, we need not to delay our obedience. Because delayed obedience is going to do exactly what looking back did to Lot's wife. Delayed obedience will kill us spiritually. It will harden our hearts towards God. And it will keep us from moving closer to Jesus. All right, so as we look at this story, I'd love for you to think for a second, like, who are you in the story? As you're reading this, who are you? Are you the Sodomites? Are you the person that you're just completely oblivious to the wickedness of your heart and you have no desire for that which is godly? Are you a Sodomite? Or maybe you're Lot's wife. Right? Your boyfriend or girlfriend or your spouse is dragging you to church because they want you to be about Jesus, and you're sitting there going like, I'm here, but really there's 1,000 other things I'd rather do than show up on a Sunday morning, right? Maybe you're kind of Lot's wife and you have no interest in spiritual things. But I have a hunch that a lot of us are more like Lot than we'd ever dare believe. There's an old Anglican bishop from England from the 1800s. His name was R.C. Ryle, and he says that we are a lot more like Lot than we dared to believe. And this is what he says, comparing Christians to Lot. He says, we know far more truth than we put into practice. We believe in heaven, but faintly long for it. We believe in hell, and yet seem little to fear it. We love Jesus, but our work for him is small. We hate the devil, but tempt him to come near. We know time is short, but we live if it were long. We know there's a battle to fight, but we live like we're at peace. We know we have a race to run, yet often look like people sitting still. We know the judge is at the door, and there is wrath to come, and yet appear half asleep. I would contend that maybe we're much more like Lot than we'd ever like to admit. So what do we do with this? What do you, I would say there's a truth and there's a takeaway. And so here's the truth. The truth is that God is not tolerant of the sins of Sodom. If you go to the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 16, verses 49 through 50, he lists out the sins of Sodom. It includes the abomination of what these men were trying to do, but it also includes things like pride, gluttony, laziness, a lack of generosity. And what we have to understand is the sins of Sodom are the same sins of our culture. Like, our culture is so comfortable and familiar with that which God has clearly defined as sinful. And so we have to understand, though, is that as we look at our culture, this isn't one that God is tolerant of. It's one that's fully deserving of God's wrath. But hear me, all right? Hear me. God's character is not irrational, hot-tempered rage monstering. It is slow to anger, patient, merciful, steadfast love, forgiving. In God's goodness, in his love, and in his mercy, he has made a way for salvation from his wrath through faith in his Son, Jesus Christ. So what do we do with this? Well, let me wrap up with this. Imagine that you go camping, okay? You're out camping in the woods, And once you start to camp, you realize that smoke blows one direction, your direction. Right? Right? Like it doesn't matter where you move, it will find you. It's like the movie Taken, right? Like it's gonna find, and so let's say you went out camping, and then after your camping trip, you come home. Right? You come home and your clothes are dirty, you've got dirt under your fingernails, your teeth feel kind of furry, and you step into a clean house. When you step into that clean house, what do you want to do? You want nothing more than to get out of your dirty clothes and to get into a nice hot shower so you can get clean, right? And that imagery of getting out of the dirty and putting on that which is clean is the imagery of taking off our old self and putting on Christ. That's the imagery of taking off that which is not of Jesus and putting on that which is of Christ. Okay, but let's say that you're home and you're in a clean house and you're like, I'm gonna fix some hot dogs. The College World Series is on. I want to get the full experience of the hot dog. And so we're going to fix a hot dog for dinner night. And so you're fixing your hot dog and it rolls off of the stove and hits the floor. Now, it's clean. You mopped it. It's swept. But when you just look at that thing, you're going, I'm starting over. Right? Like you're dumping that in the trash can, giving it to the dog because you're not going to eat a hot dog that just hit the floor, right? Because when you're in a clean environment, you're much more in tune to the things that you should avoid, right? But let's say you're camping again. You're out camping, you're far from home, you're all dirty. That hot dog hits the ground and rolls over some dirt, and you're like, fire kills germs. Dust it off, put it back on that stick that you gathered from where bears pee, and you throw it in the fire, and you're like, we're gonna eat this thing, right? Because when you're far from home and you're in a place that's not clean, you're much more likely to compromise and do things you wouldn't otherwise do. The same thing goes for holiness. The closer you are to holiness, the more in tune you are with the things that you should move away from and the things that you should move towards. And the further from holiness you get, the more likely you are to compromise where you should never compromise. And so the big takeaway is this. In Christianity, we can often live with boundary mentality. Like, where's the line? How far is too far to go with my girlfriend or boyfriend? How much alcohol is too much alcohol before it becomes sinful? How much, how far, how long? Where's the edge and how can I get as close to possible because I don't want to cross over it, but I want to balance it, right? That's looking to the line. If there's anything we can learn from Lot as he moved towards Sodom, began to get into Sodom, as we see his wife looking back to Sodom, if there's anything we can learn, it's this. Don't look to the line, look to the Lord. Don't push the edge and the boundaries of what you can and can't do. Move closer and closer to Jesus because he is our abundant life. God, thank you for your word. We want to be a people who hear your word proclaimed and that we respond appropriately. And so, Father, wherever people are this morning, God, help them to respond as they need to respond. For those who are far from you, would you draw them near again? For those whose hearts have become hardened from a familiarity with sin and a comfort with the sinful culture, God, would you soften their hearts and trouble them with the things that are breaking your heart? God, for those who are trying to live within two worlds that just don't go together, that are not compatible, God, would you help them to fully step into your kingdom? But God, wherever we are, help us to respond as you lead. In your name we pray. Amen.